Hello, boys and girls and children of all ages. Please forgive the unusual camera angle. This is the Fat Bastard Wannabe Buddha coming at you today. Unfortunately, my monitor broke down, so I'm using an actual brick. And it is an actual brick. It's actually about 10 years old. And surprisingly, it's an O2 monitor that actually still works, considering the nice little plasma or whatever it was monitor broke within a year and a half. But technology ain't what it's made to be. Planned obsolescence. Anyway, I wanted to do this vlog around November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day, and I take a little heat by still remembering Guy Fawkes Day. It's not my favorite holiday. My favorite holiday is Bastille Day and May Day. But I don't bash up on people running around with Guy Fawkes masks and the anonymous folks, because more and more people reading more and more information cheers me up. It introduces a whole new generation of anarchist thought. So, truthfully, I don't think you get the Black Brigades without Alan Moore's V for Vendetta. And that's a good thing in many ways, despite what Christopher Hedges says. And I like Chris Hedges. Anyway, what I was going to discuss today is how you end up being an anarchist syndicalist when you're actually from a small rural town in South Carolina. And the answer to that is really simple. I grew up dirt poor, and seriously poor. My mother was a machinist, worked in the local textile mills for 22 years of her life until she basically died. And I was a sickly kid. That's right, boys and girls. Like all the other ones that come before you, I was one of those sickly kids, and me and my mother figured it out. By the time I was 12 or 13 years old, we had deduced that I had spent about 3 to 4 years of my life physically in hospitals. There's a combination of low cell white cell count, weak lungs, right lungs a little bit abnormal size, and my lining of my heart is unusually thin, and so I spent a large portion of my life in and out of hospitals. So that's how you end up being a left winger in this society. Being sick constantly, or being constantly coming to the realization that life ain't fair and it will smash you down over and over and over again, that actually what makes you a lefty. People don't talk about this that much, but see, a lot of right-wing conservatives, they fundamentally believe that people get what they deserve. There's this strange theory of karma and, God's grace, or whatever, how else they frame it in themselves. But they believe people fundamentally get what they deserve out of life. They believe it's just and it's rational, and that if you just really try super hard, it'll work out for you. It will work out for you, and everything will be coming up golden for you. And I've seen too many dead babies and too many dead kids to realize that life ain't fair, and no matter how hard you try and how much effort you put into it, you don't get what you put into it sometimes. It just doesn't work out that way. So you want to remove some of the edges off of life, and that's one of the reasons I ended up on the left side of the argument most of the time. But how that went about happening is, basically, when I was a little kid, I spent a lot of times in the hospitals. And in being a sickly little kid, the only ways you're going to get out of the South and join the military. And my mother would absolutely have killed me. My family, every one of my families got combat experience, but my mother made abundantly clear that I was not going into the military under any circumstance. So she actually threatened to break my legs when she found out that I had some Army documents. That's how the poor folks in the South end up going to college. I was the only person in my family that ended up going to college, and the first person in my family ended up going to college. Luckily, I didn't have to do it by going through the U.S. military. I ended up having to do it by being a carpenter and flipping houses for a long period of time and banking a lot of money so I could afford it, but still couldn't afford a U.S. education completely, so that's why I'm drowning in debt. Anyway, I'm rambling. So when I was a young kid, I started out reading everything I possibly could read. And in my family, it was required that we argued over politics. And our politics and religion was the weekend sports for us. That's what we argued about constantly. And my family, my mother and my grandmother was what you would consider Kennedy Democrats, and my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather, they were what you consider old Roosevelt New Dealers. So that's sort of what I came into. And obviously, I had to be more radical than any of those things. And my mother was raising me to be a nonconformist and not take any jack from anybody and defend myself, which often meant that me and her engaged in a lot of disagreements. Until the point she said she had enough of it, and then I would do whatever she told me to do, like a good little boy. Anyway, so the earliest memories when I realized that I was an anarchist and I didn't know there was a word for it, is I remember seeing Noam Chomsky on the Phil Donahue show really early in the late 70s. I want to say early 80s. I can't really place it. And I remember started reading some Chomsky here and there, and my mother gave me Leo Tolstoy's The Gospels in Brief. My mother was sort of a Tolstoyan Christian or a Christian socialist. She didn't talk about it that much or frame it that way, but in truth, that's pretty much what she was. And I remember reading the Gospels in Brief, and as obviously a good little Southern boy, I read the King James Bible 3 or 4 times before I was 11 years old. Used to actually read the King James Bible before to my great-grandfather who couldn't read. Used to read it to him every weekend. And yeah, that'll do it to you. You know, the Sermon on the Mount will turn you into a left-wing commie if you actually pay attention to it. But unfortunately, most people don't read it. I never was a believer, and that didn't bother my family at all any, because, hey, Thomas wasn't a believer, and Jesus still hung out with him. So they liked having an atheist around, and I've been an atheist my entire life. Yes, this is a rambling blog, like I said. It's going to be more of a personal blog. So I remember reading the Gospels in Brief, and I remember reading Chomsky, and I think the first thing I read was the Chomsky Reader or something, on the old Verso book. And if you look on the date on it, I think it's 81 or 82. I'm not really positive on that. I could go look it up, but I don't want to. And then I was a bad little boy, and I didn't go to school, and I had a history of predisposition for violence. And I remember doing a long period of 9-month stretch in a place called Marshall Pickens Hospital. And while I was inside there, I read Rousseau's Discourse on Inequality. And also, I stumbled upon, my mother gave me a copy of several Orwell books, and I found Homage to Catalona. And next thing I knew, there was something called Anarchist. And I found, Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev, and The Red and the Black by Sten Hall, and I obsessively read everything I physically could. I did this for a multitude of reasons. I'm crazy. And it's one of the few times, one of the ways when I was younger to shut my brain down. My mind would always wander and go from topic to topic and really scattered shot. And if I found myself reading or obsessively reading, it's one of the ways I could shut it down. Later in life, I couldn't figure out any ways of shutting it down. Hey, strip clubs worked for a while, but you can't really do the strip club scene that much. Otherwise, it gets really bad. So I couldn't. It was one of the things when I was a really young kid that shut my brain down, is I'm reading obsessively. And drawing doesn't periodically, but I don't draw as much as I should. So anyway, I decided at the ripe young age of around 11 to 12 years old that I was an anarchist. And what type of anarchist I was, I didn't exactly know. I knew I wasn't one of those primitive anarchists. I didn't want to go back to the good old boys and days of, a primitive lifestyle, because I knew I'd be dead. Because I was entirely dependent upon modern medicine to keep my little butt alive. So I decided to try to figure out what was the best system I could conceive of that would give, the greatest amount of technological advances while maintaining the two little things that anarchists or left-wingers want to hold in true. And that is the maximization of equality, while you also maximization of liberty. And that's where I was trying to struggle through as a young kid. And I still haven't, to this day, figured it completely out. I ended up settling on anarcho-syndicalism, the Wobblies, the IWW, Read a lot of Rudolf Rocker thanks to Noam Chomsky. He introduced me to Rudolf Rocker. So I decided I was an anarcho-syndicalist because that would be the most efficient way to maximize the technological and material development that you need in a society to maintain a level of equality. But you always run into the problem of, in order to do large-scale industrial civilization, you run right and smack into how do you maintain equality. Because once you get over 500 people, you can't keep score anymore. That's evolutionary biology taught us that. It's about 500 people where you can really remember reciprocity and who did what and when did they do it and how, and keep a level of society. So large-scale industrial society requires a little bit more than 500 folks. And anarcho-syndicalism was the only method that I could think of, some form of unionization as a means of a rotating democratic rule of unionization as a method of achieving equality and liberty. And also early on, I had to come to the conclusion that sometimes you're going to have to fudge on one. Which one do you fudge on? Do you fudge on liberty or do you fudge on equality? And as a lefty, I fudge a little bit on the liberty as opposed to the equality. I think equality is the most important thing, unfortunately. It really is. We only get one trip around this merry-go-round, and we should try to make it most humane for everybody and give each and every person the opportunity to achieve as much as they can and help as much as they can in the greater society. So that's how I came down on it. I chose a little bit more equality over liberty, with the golden rule of trying to maximize them on most of them on both. And yeah, I recognize the inherent flaws in a lot of my discourse. I know the inherent flaw of Marxism is actually quite similar to the inherent flaw of libertarianism, in which you make a normative claim and then you seek to violate that normative claim in order to ensure it. But that's how I ended up being an anarchist. It happened around when I was between the ages of 7 years old, when my lung first collapsed, to the time I was about 11. It took me about 4 or 5 years to really come to the conclusion that I was an anarchist and there was an actual such a thing. And it was a combination of being a sickly kid, seeing that life wasn't fair and wasn't just, and doing the most that you can to alleviate that, and coming to the conclusion that I didn't want to tell people what to do, and I didn't want people to tell me what to do, and if we was going to do anything, it was going to be a mutual effort to achieve. And reading a massive amount of books, and truthfully, more so than the Noam Chomskys and the Rudolf Rockers and Bakunin and Emma Goldman. Actually, it was more the Tolstoys and Turgenev of Fathers and Sons and Balzac and several of the more literature-based that turned me into a left-wing anarchist. And that's what I was going to talk to you today about. Hopefully you got something out of that. Thank you very much for your time and effort. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you.